paper is about basically what neoliberal theory of information. I'm not sure if I could call it misinformation or disinformation. They just have a completely different view of what information is, and because they have a different epistemological approach. At the beginning of the slide, there is a quote of Lord Acton, which was an inspiration for Friedrich Hayek, who says that the age preferred the reign of intellect to the reign of liberty, meaning that these two things are actually two different things, according to Lord Acton. They believed that, of course, the French Enlightenment was this reign of intellect at the beginning of the modern age. And they believed that it is a bad thing for the social progress because it is an obstacle for liberty. So the neoliberal approach is actually anti-rationalistic approach. It constantly questions the rationality of human beings and the possibility of creating any kind of organized knowledge system, such as encyclopedia. So in the case, for example, of French encyclopedias, one of the neoliberals, Wilhelm Röpke, criticized them as not just rationalists and advocates of scientism, but also as collectivists, which was a little strange for me. But then I realized that this was the idea that those were a group of experts, centrally organized, so kind of socialist organization of knowledge production to create the encyclopedia, the sum of all knowledge. And neoliberals are against that. They're against this idea that experts are the ones who produce the most knowledge, but it is the common people that produce the most socially usable knowledge. And this knowledge can be very different from what we consider scientific knowledge. For Fritz Machlup, he is one of the pioneers of information society or knowledge society. He is actually not interested in this kind of expert knowledge, but mundane and ephemeral knowledge, something that is important right now, today, but not tomorrow, ephemeral in that case. And of course, this idea that we don't need some kind of expert verification of something, whether it's true or false, but the market will do the job of digesting this dispersed information is at the bottom of neoliberal paradigm. Hayek basically said that at his Nobel Prize winning acceptance speech in 1974. He even defined the market as a communication system that is the most efficient mechanism for this information processing, or like he said, digesting dispersed information. His idea is, of course, that experts do not possess the knowledge, but the knowledge is dispersed, incomplete, and inconsistent, but it appears in many individual minds. And this is the idea that was an inspiration for Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, who decided, of course, to create the encyclopedia in a completely different way, the way that is not centrally organized, but through crowdsourcing. And this is completely liberal idea that is based that many people could do one job of creating information, whether it is encyclopedic information or crowdsourcing journalism. So when we have this kind of approach that is considered, that considers human beings not so rational, but nevertheless they respect their opinions about anything, their knowledge that can be mundane and not actually true, you basically leave the market to deal with this kind of information. You get the contemporary situation where somebody can be against vaccines or to accept different conspiracy theories, to believe that the earth is flat, that the COVID-19 is invented in the lab, and etc. Because this social system, like Hayek said in the 1950s, is a social system that has to use these people and their knowledge in all varieties, sometimes intelligent and more often stupid. This is his idea. That is, of course, what other neoliberals also believe. Some of them are a little less popular, like Alexander Ristov, think, of course, that this Middle Ages, that is the late Middle Ages, were actually the most balanced age ever. Then Protestantism came, and that was actually a bad thing for the social development of civilization. But now that we are having some kind of revival, even of the Middle Ages in the popular culture, but also this idea that all kinds of information can be usable by consumers, we have a different situation. And of course, one of which is the so-called populism. Now, Murray Rothbard is actually one of the intellectuals that are very important for Trump supporters. Not all Trump supporters, but those hardcore ones on the right wing, who, of course, talked about anti-elitist political activism decades ago. Like he says in his paper, Strategy for the Right, that the greatest threat for liberty are not the unwashed masses, but the power elites. But even the idea that connects with the neoliberal paradigm is this constant suspicion of enlightenment, rationality, the idea that human beings are capable of constructing some complex institutions. Actually, those institutions created in the 20th century should be repealed, again, according to Rothbard. The welfare state institutions, New Deal, social democracy, and others. So basically, he finishes his paper with the sentence, "We shall repeal the 20th century." So these people, of course, when Rothbard himself was at some point the director of the Cato Institute, one of the institutions financed by Koch brothers. Of course, if we go into all institutions that were financed, there are like 3 or more than 300 institutions in the United States, we will just lose the perspective that the whole point is that Koch brothers finance many institutions that don't even agree with each other on some levels, whether there are think tanks, universities, or just citizen groups. But the whole point is to create this surplus noise, like Philip Mirovsky says in one of his forthcoming papers, in order to create all kinds of information that doesn't have to be true in from the expert perspective, but that people believe in them. And if they believe in them, and this is what they are looking for on the market, they as consumers can get this kind of good on the, in this case, information market. And of course, this is based on the so-called behavioral economics or neuroeconomics. There are many names under which this is called. These are, of course, all Nobel Prize winners in economics. The most notorious one is Gary Becker, who in the 1970s said that basically he wants to use economics to explain all human behavior, because every human behavior can be considered as a utility function. Everything that we want or have, what our desires are, our preferences can be, even if they're not financial, can be interpreted as an attempt to maximize the utility, that is to accumulate an optimal amount of information that we need. Even, for example, this conference would be interpreted by Gary Becker as some kind of utility function. We are here to accumulate an optimal amount of the needed information. Sometimes, of course, and lately, most of the time, they're interested how to deal with this information gathering on a not so rational level. Another novelist, Thomas Schelling, said that he is actually interested more in the unconscious and the involuntary end of the scale of information processing. So after Thomas Schelling in the 70s, many economists, or at least people who received the Nobel Prize for economics, were not focused only on the economic problems. For example, David Kahneman was a psychologist who created this idea of human mind as a system with two cognitive systems that he called basically just system 1 or system 2. Another novelist, Richard Thaler, called it the automatic and reflective system, and gave this more, let's say, illustrative idea that the automatic system that we don't actually voluntarily control, but we do this very naturally and automatically, is the so-called Homer-Simpson system that is used by people most of the time. Actually, our deliberative, deductive system 2, the reflective system, that is more in line with our experience of agency and our human choice, is used, according to David Kahneman, very rarely. Most of the time, it's actually, they believe people don't act rationally, but according to their automatic preferences that are based on the system, cognitive system 1. And of course, it is there on the system 1 that Cass Sunstein suggests that we should influence people, because what people actually do can be more effectively altered by the nudges that are focused on the system 1. And of course, he thinks, along with Richard Thaler in their book on the nudge in 2008, that nudges are there to help people to improve their decisions and social outcomes because of their basically cognitive deficiencies. But of course, the problem is when you manipulate this fact. If this is actually true, that people are not so rational beings, you can use so-called conspiracy cascades or fake information to make them believe something that is not true. So Sunstein and Vermeule thought about how conspiracy theories are actually constructed. They believe it's basically more in line with the Gabriel Tard sociology of micro-sociology that starts with smaller groups, with people with low thresholds, that is the weaker system 1 cognitive function, that will accept at some point certain conspiracy theory. Then in some certain process of snowballing that can be even based on an emotional content rather than information, more people will line up with this because of informational pressure, even or disinformational pressure for that matter, right? And but when many people hold this belief, those with even higher thresholds may come to accept the conspiracy theory, leading to widespread acceptance of falsehoods. And this is what Sunstein and Vermeule called the conspiracy cascade. Now, this is, of course, based on, again, the idea that humans are not rational, and you can suggest them whether you can, of course, use this for the good or the bad, right? But again, what neoliberals believe is that usually humans will not try to change their views, that there is a certain preference for belief consonants, according to Goldman, Lowenstein, and associates, because they treat information as something that carries negative utility. Again, if we go to Gary Becker, who thinks that all human behavior can be basically examined as an attempt to maximize our utility. Information that could jeopardize our beliefs will be avoided because it carries negative utility. That is, that our information gathering processes, information gathering practices of any human can be analyzed through a cost-benefit approach. And of course, Goldman, Lowenstein, and others think that this is what media organizations base their businesses, that they want their audience, of course, to stay with them or even to increase their audience, which results in the information avoidance even by the media organizations that provide biased coverage, so that this coverage could align with the perspective of their targeted audience. And of course, they find that in a report of Pew Research Center, that this resulted in a very ideologically segregated news production and consumption, meaning that 30 years ago, there were a lot of so-called liberal Republicans, 40%, according to the Pew Research, while today only 8% of Republicans are considered liberal. In the case of Democrats, that is, conservative Democrats, there were 30% of them in 1994, and by 2014, the numbers have shrunk to 6% of the conservative Republicans as the result of this business program that you have to basically respect consumers' preference for belief consonants and their drive for sense making, which is basically that news or information should be simplified and shouldn't jeopardize the subscriber's image of good life. That is, of course, a way to call it a confirmation bias, and they even believe that academics do it too, that they don't challenge their theories the same way the audience doesn't want to challenge their favorable worldviews, and which is the basis of more and more news segregation on the level of production and consumption. In the case of online media, that is the social media, it is, of course, the phenomenon of Cambridge Analytica, again, based on the idea that people are not that rational. This is just one of the tables that Michal Kosinski had in his dissertation, how he uses Facebook likes in order to create a certain kind of psychological profile of the Facebook users. Again, I'm not sure it's completely scientifically correct, but again, if we go back to the idea that neoliberals are not actually concerned with that because they just want to let the market do its job, which is, we can just see, of course, this is the American Facebook users. So, for example, for American Facebook users that like the page on Sarah Palin, it's an indicator that they are satisfied with their lives. I'm not sure that this is something that we can use in Europe, or that, for example, if you like soccer, that is the football, you are probably calm and relaxed and not neurotic, according to Kosinski's research. So this kind of information that he gathered by, of course, big data processing of Facebook likes, the result is a certain kind of psychological profile where he counts your level of imagination, modesty, trust. Are you prone to worry, melancholic, anxious? Are you easily getting angry and stuff like that, which was very important in the elections. or in the 2016 elections, and of course in other elections in the future, where especially anxious citizens were least likely to decide who will they vote for on, or what will they believe, which is why usually campaigns didn't want to create some kind of anxiety among the citizens, but on the other hand, getting them angry through some false information, which there were a lot, will definitely bring them to vote for the other candidate, the candidate that was not presented in a bad way by some information. It doesn't have to be false, of course. It doesn't have to be pure disinformation. It can be just negative news coverage, which is important for at least this idea of Cambridge Analytica, that on an emotional level and on a maybe even subconscious level, you can influence people by, of course, micro-targeting them on social media. To wrap this up, basically, of course, it's all work in progress, but I think that this theory that neoliberals basically critical of the enlightenment of the modern age idea of rationality in humans is, of course, constantly you can basically see it in any of the practices, information production practices, news, journalism, or social media. And that constantly, anywhere that you look, there will be some kind of embodiment of this neoliberal paradigm.